Obviously, once the camshaft gear has been properly installed, valve timing as such will not change. However, other factors can affect the timing, principally valve gap, otherwise called valve clearance or valve lash. This is the total spacing between the rocker arm and the valve stem. The clearance on engines manufactured after November 1964 should be 0.15 millimeter, or 0.006 inches, when the engine is cold. The correct valve gap for the car should appear on a label on the fan housing. The spacing is most conveniently measured between the valve stem and the rocker arm. A valve is a simple-looking thing, but it takes quite a beating in doing its work. Here is a cross-section of a Volkswagen valve, showing the head, the margin, and the face. The face is the surface that contacts the valve seat and must make a perfect seal for utmost engine efficiency. The stem slides up and down in the valve guide, which is an insert in the cylinder head. The intake valve is slightly larger than the exhaust valve and stays relatively cool because it only has to pass the fuel-air mixture. But the exhaust valve is another matter. It must pass the hot exhaust gases and can become red hot during normal operation. Therefore, the exhaust valve is made of special steel alloys. Both valves are cooled through two heat sinks. As the valve contacts its seat, here in the face, the majority of its heat is dissipated into the cylinder head, and the valve guide absorbs heat from the stem. So we can see that proper seating of the valve is essential to its life, and the time that a valve is on its seat also strongly influences its life. If the valve is unevenly seated, two things happen. First, there is less area of contact for the heat to be passed to the valve seat. Further, uneven contact may mean that hot exhaust gases will leak between the valve face and seat in some places. These higher temperatures greatly shorten valve life as the hot spots wear away more quickly. In the following sequence of drawings, we can see why an improper valve gap can seriously affect valve timing and engine performance. For one thing, the engine must operate when it is cold and when it is hot. Metal expands with heat and contracts with cold, but not all parts expand or contract at the same rate. Allowances must be made for these variations. In addition, valve gap adjustments become necessary from time to time because of wear between valve faces and seats, wear on valve stem ends, wear on push rods and rocker arms, and even stretching of the valve stem, which is under tension by the valve spring. Let's take some extreme examples to illustrate the importance of proper clearance. Here, the intake and exhaust valves have no clearance when cold. As soon as the car is started, the engine will begin to warm up and the valves will expand faster than the cylinder head. During this time, the intake valve will not completely close. There will be a loss of compression and a loss of power because the fuel-air mixture can escape during compression and power strokes. In addition, the unburned fuel that escapes through the exhaust port will cause emission problems. Both valves will run hotter because they are subjected to hot exhaust pressure for a longer period and are not on their seats for a long enough time to dissipate their heat. And valve timing will obviously be off because the valves are open for a longer period of time. Now, let's look at the opposite situation. Valve gap is twice the recommended amount. The rocker arm must travel an additional 0.15 millimeter before contacting the valve stem. The most obvious effect will be the extra noise, as the rocker arms slap against the valve stems. But much more harmful to the engine and to emission control is the fact that now the valves do not fully open, and they are not open long enough. The result is there is not enough time for the fuel-air mixture to enter the cylinder, especially at full throttle. Compression is lower, and power is lost. The exhaust does not have enough time to be fully eliminated, so the valves run hotter, and there is less room in the cylinder for fuel-air mixture. The extra distance the rocker arms travel means they hit the valve stems harder and will eventually pound them out of shape. As stated earlier, adjusting the valves is not a difficult job at all. The engine must be cold when valve clearance is checked. Remove the distributor cap and turn the engine by hand until the smaller side of the rotor points to the mark on the distributor housing. The notch in the pulley should be lined up with a split in the crankcase. The object is to have the piston of the cylinder being adjusted at top dead center of its power stroke, so that both valves are closed. Valves are adjusted in cylinder order 1, 2, 3, 4. So, first remove the valve cover for cylinders 1 and 2. Insert the 0.15 millimeter blade of the feeler gauge between the rocker arm and valve stem. Press on the push rod end of the rocker arm to ensure that all play between the rocker arm, push rod, and cam is taken up. Valve clearance is properly adjusted if the gauge can be slid between the adjusting screw and stem smoothly. If it slides too easily or must be forced, an adjustment is necessary. Loosen the lock nut of the adjusting screw and turn the screw until you have the proper feel. One way to check out how a proper setting feels is to set a micrometer at 0.15 millimeters and slip the feeler gauge through the gap. When the setting is right, carefully tighten the lock nut. Now, be sure and recheck to see that the screw did not move during tightening. If it did, readjust. Now, turn the engine over by hand counterclockwise 1/2 revolution of the pulley. The rotor will turn 90 degrees. After checking number 2 cylinder, proceed in the same manner with number 3 and number 4, rotating the pulley counterclockwise 180 degrees each time. Each time the rotor will move counterclockwise 90 degrees. When the adjustments have been completed, check the valve cover gaskets to be sure they are in good condition. If not, replace the valve cover with new gaskets. Be sure and clean the cover with solvent first. Run the engine for a few minutes, and then check for leaks in the gaskets and replace if necessary. We have seen that improper valve clearance can cause burning of valves and valve seats, distortion of valves, poor performance, rough engine running, change in exhaust emission, noisy timing mechanism, and changed valve timing. And all this can be avoided by proper maintenance. Proper maintenance is the responsibility of 3 people: the service advisor, who diagnoses the trouble, the mechanic, who is assigned the repair order, and, of course, the owner, because if he doesn't bring his car into the shop, you can't fix it. And the better you fix it, the happier your customer will be.
beep, beep.